Welcome to Community Capital, a podcast about visionary founders and dedicated community builders who are shaping the future one connection at a time.
I'm your host, Zara Naqvi, Head of Founder Community at Republic.
Thank you so much for coming on the Community Capital podcast. We're super excited to have you. I love what you're building with Doola. We're going to get more into it, but the question I love to just open up the conversation with is first establishing that you're incredibly accomplished with what you've done with Doola. And so I always love to ask, did you know you wanted to be a founder, or when did that moment really arise for you?
First of all, thank you for having me. And none of this or none of where I would be today would be possible without a few key groups of people. It really starts back with my family, originally from India, ended up moving to England and then immigrated here when I was 6 years old. Professors at the University of Pennsylvania, my mentors and colleagues at Dropbox, and then our earliest investors and most importantly our customers. But when I'm telling the story of Doola, the truth is when I was 6 years old, I've always been thinking about LLCs and C Corps. That's actually complete BS. So a lot of people see the business and think, okay, maybe have you been thinking about this for a while and how did you learn it? The truth is, the first company we formed, we had no clue how to do it. And I've talked to actually the founder who formed with us, and I've told them now, thankfully we got some things wrong, but got enough right. And really, this was something which we realized was a problem and thought, what if we could solve it? And I think being naive is actually really good because one, you don't realize how hard it's gonna be. And then two, you can approach things from a first principles perspective as well. So I was joking there, I've not been thinking about LLCs for a while. Now I joke, I think about them all the time. And truthfully, it all starts with my family. My family was doctors in India. They ended up moving to England to start practicing medicine. And then when I was 6, they immigrated here. And at the time, all I remember was the cartoons changed, people sound different. I used to have a British accent, believe it or not, but I lost it. I don't have a Boston accent now. I guess that's a good thing. But now when I've asked my parents why they did it, as cheesy as it sounds, they said it was for this idea of the American dream or American upside. And the cultural mixing pot that's available in America in terms of the people here, the diversity, the upwards mobility, and the ability where you can work hard and entrepreneurship and start your own thing or start your own business and really achieve your dreams. Very cheesy, very cliche, but I think it's very true. And this wasn't the plan, but if you fast forward to Doola, I think what we ultimately do is democratize access to American entrepreneurship, where talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. And a company is a vehicle to really taking this dream idea you have and turning it into a dream business. So in hindsight, you can always connect the dots. So the story sounds very linear, but the truth is, and we can get into this, many ups and downs along the way for sure.
And so when it came to the experience that you had, like you mentioned, and everything that you, I guess, culminated in leading up to Doola, when did you have that moment, that specific moment, or I guess a culmination of moments that made you realize this is a problem, there's not a great solution, and I want to go forward and actually start a company that solves this?
I do think that if you have an itch, it's very hard for that itch to go away. If anything, the itch gets stronger and it gets bigger and becomes more something you want to itch. Doola wasn't something which I'd been thinking of since I was 6. That was very much a joke. I want to say that again. But even since I was in college, I had this idea for this social fitness app I wanted to build. And when I was applying to Dropbox, they asked a question that said, during Hack Week, which is their week when you can hack or build on anything, what would you do? And that's when I first wrote out for the first time the idea for this app. That was my senior year of college. For the next 5 years, I was thinking about it, not nonstop, but it kept coming back up in my head. I don't think someone's done this. I think I could try it. But for 5 years, I did nothing. It wasn't Doola. It wasn't Doola at all. It was a completely different idea. But eventually, that itch became so large that I decided, hey, I could join an earlier stage startup. I'm gonna go try to start this thing. Worst thing that happens is, I have some money saved up. Worst thing that happens is it doesn't work and I can go back and get another job. And that itch, it doesn't go away, but it's taking that plunge that led to Doola originally. So I do think if anyone out there has an itch, it's not gonna go away. If anything, it's only gonna get bigger. So in hindsight, I'm actually not embarrassed that that first thing didn't work. I'm actually kicking myself for not trying it 5 years ago because I would have learned at that moment, and who knows, maybe Doola would have started earlier or it could have been something else. But now I know if I have an itch, it doesn't mean you have to completely quit your job and sacrifice everything and go into it, but scratch the itch. Do it in some way, shape, or form. It could be outside of your 9 to 5 on nights, it could be on weekends, it could be a tiny test that you do. But to answer your question in a long-winded way, I launched that app, posted a Twitter thread, it went viral for my standards back then. Things have changed now, fortunately, which has been good. But from that, again, you can connect the dots now very linearly. An investor reached out. He did not want to invest. The app was a bad idea, actually, because we were competing with Instagram and ClassPass. But Through that investor, ended up getting intro to someone, connect the dots, ended up getting into YC. That company actually didn't work too, and then through the pivot process, ended up with Doola, because spending close to $30,000 on legal fees to start a company, you might think that's the world, and hey, thankfully you have a check from an investor and that's the price of doing business. But then you realize, wait a second, you don't have to do that. Maybe you can use tech to automate it, maybe you can't, but we were naive in a good way, and that is what led to Doola. What if you could automate formation, sort of click a button like the Staples Easy button, start a company, but then handle setting up your payment stack and compliance on an ongoing basis? And if you can do that, there's really this never-ending onboarding or checklist of things founders need, from tactical tools, products, and services to education, community, and guidance along the way as well.
And so before we get into like the capital part of this podcast, really discussing the fundraise and everything you've accomplished on that side, I love what Doola is doing, specifically the way that you framed it on like really, I guess, democratizing access to this like American dream, because the legal stuff that goes behind actually setting up a company and going forward with it, like you mentioned, it's fairly complicated. Before Doola, it was fairly complicated. It cost a lot of money. People didn't really know where to go. And I like to think of that being honestly the like number one blocker, because it is just truly so confusing. And if you don't have the right systems in place, you can't really execute. And so before we get to the capital side of things, I really just kind of want to understand from your perspective now, having built Doola out, having the solution exist, how have you seen that, I guess, like transform lives? If that's not like too cliche or cheesy to ask, I just think it is such a pivotal and important product that you're building.
I don't want to sound conceited or narcissistic, I don't want to sound conceited in any way, but I actually think that a company and starting a company is changing someone's life. It's a dream come true. And I'm not saying that to just create this conception of what we're doing is God's work or changing the world, but in some senses, we hear this directly from customers. Day to day, what you are tactically doing is you are automating the submission of paperwork to a state through an archaic website. You're receiving documents back, you're streamlining that process. That saves you time, it saves you money because you're using technology, and it saves you stress. But in terms of just the savings, for that person, you are totally right. Starting a business is a dream for many people. It doesn't also mean that you're going on to raise millions of venture capital. A lot of people think, actually, I'll admit, when I used to live in San Francisco, my walk to work every day would be I would pass the Uber office, pass the Twitter office, take a right down, I think it was 2nd Ave or 2nd Street, past LinkedIn, I think Mixmax at the time was there, and then on the same street where Dropbox was, there was Pinterest, there was Airbnb, and then Dropbox. And then I knew all around me there were probably the next unicorns, next startups too. So when you're around that, I actually thought that when someone starts a business, they form a Delaware C Corp, they apply to YC, they try to get on TechCrunch, they go on Product Hunt, and that's what every founder in the world does. The truth is it's the exact opposite. Most of the world, there's over 20 or even 30 million, depending on where you look at it, small and medium-sized businesses, they're not raising venture capital, they're bootstrapping. And for those folks, you don't have to give up everything. You can work on a side hustle. It can be an e-commerce business or consulting. And for them, a company is actually a vehicle to making this dream come true. And we hear this time and time again. People saying, it's easier to form a company in the US with Doola than it is to do in my home country. I always like to say, before you can go 0 to 1 and find product market fit, you have to go 0 to 0.1 and get your business off the ground. And you are absolutely right. We see this time and time again. People think, I have this idea, I have this itch, but I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a CPA, I don't know how to set up a business and a bank account and taxes, I'm not cut out for this. That's absolute BS. I didn't know any of those things too. Even now, we're still learning parts of the process as we go. And I think that's the thing. People say fake it till you make it. In some senses, you're gonna learn along the way and you are gonna figure things out as you go. But our goal is, again, if we can make it click button easy and educate people on what's going to happen, but they don't need to know the details, that's our job, then we actually can increase entrepreneurship globally. And today, there's about 400,000 active companies being formed per month, so almost 5 million per year in the US. If Doola can achieve its mission and its scale, that number could go to 4 million per month. And Doola can single-handedly actually increase entrepreneurship globally. And I think more entrepreneurship is amazing because it's not just the founder whose lives changed. It's the founder's customers. It's their family members. It's their friends. Everyone. There's this massive network or web of effects and people that are impacted. And that's what it gets intoxicating for me to think about, because with a single tweet or with a single product change, that one person forming a company, you've actually changed the lives of a factor of 10 or even 100 more people. And I believe everyone wants to have impacted some way, shape, or form at the end of the day. That's something that really drives me thinking about, our time on Earth is actually just a dot, it's a speck. So to me, waking up every day and realizing something I do today can change the life of even just one person, but in reality it's 10 or 100, that doesn't get old. Whether it's one company, 100, or 10,000 companies, that'll never get old.
Yeah, that's amazing, and I think this is why I resonate so heavily with what you're doing with Doola, because it is something that even had Doola existed, or had I known about it, like let's say 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, and it was something that I could have acted on, I feel like there were so many opportunities that I just had to kind of miss out on because I just didn't have the formal structures in place, and I didn't understand the benefits of having an LLC and why that would be important to me, even just like as an individual doing contract work and advising and consulting. And so, yeah, I just want to commend you. I think I love what you're doing with Doola. That's why we wanted to have you on the podcast. But I guess now transitioning into the capital side of things, you did go through YC, of course, and then you also have fundraised from venture capital. And I think here at Republic, obviously, we believe and definitely notice that there is kind of almost like a hierarchy of what types of fundraising make the most sense for certain businesses, and I feel like venture capital is very much like at the top of that hierarchy, and people definitely use that as a barometer of success, even though in and of itself it maybe isn't indicative of that. And so I'd love to just kind of understand more about your experience raising venture capital, especially because I do think with everything you've accomplished, I actually admire the fact that it seems like you're being really smart with venture capital raising. Like I feel like you could do these like insane huge rounds that get kind of like boosted by like, I guess, like ego and people feeling like they can raise like hundreds of millions of dollars, but I feel like you're taking Doola in a very like stern direction, in the sense that you're not raising too much, you're raising the amount you need, and you're raising with partners who really value you. And so I'd love to just understand more about the way that you approached VC and fundraising and how you thought about that process, because I just really admire the way that you're doing it.
Y Combinator was one of our earliest investors. We ended up going through YC, and something YC says all the time is it's the advice they gave where you're like, wait a second, does that really sound right? Where you should actually perk up your ears and listen. It's that non-common or that contrarian advice. Lots of advice like, hey, talk to users, build customers, everyone says. But when YC says something like, hey, more money, more problems, raising more money actually will cause more problems, as a first-time founder, you're thinking, what are you talking about? How can more money lead to more problems? Like, I'm sitting here, I haven't taken a paycheck in months, years actually in some cases, and there's so many tests we want to run, we want to hire people, we don't have money. How could more money create more problems? In hindsight, and this is I think the value of a YC, they've worked with thousands, actually tens of thousands of companies, and VCs maybe get a bad rap for being just pattern matchers. I think in some cases though, pattern matching is fantastic. We've seen 1,000 companies, 100% of them make the same mistake. Okay, I'm going to listen here. This is a Newton's fourth law, if you will. It's a fundamental law of the startup universe. And with regards to capital raising, look, I do think that having capital does allow you to do certain things. It allows you to hire more aggressively. You can run more tests. It gives you peace of mind to run the business, to know that your finances are taken care of. But I do think more money does create more problems. I think absolutely have made this mistake too. If you operate with a mindset of, hey, I need to build an actual business here. We can't just spend and figure things out later. Counterintuitively, or not counterintuitively, that makes you more attractive to investors going forward too. Also, I will say, raising capital is very hard. I think there's always the stories of people, and you see these online or on the websites where, oh, this person tweeted and in 24 hours raised 10 or $15 million. That's the vast minority. It's the same thing as a lottery ticket winner. When I've talked to founders and even from other investors, whatever you want to call it, the rule of 30, the rule of 60, it takes 30 meetings, actual meetings, so there's back and forth and people dropping, to even get to one term sheet or even one offer. That could be an angel check. So if you do the math there, it could be 90, 120, 150 meetings to do something. And I think that's the truth. In every single one of our previous fundraising rounds, it's been lots of meetings, lots of no's. I actually have a document where I have written out every single rejection or no we've ever gotten in the history. And when it comes to that, I believe that you have to believe the no, but ignore the why. So they're saying no, but within the reason why an investor said no, there's going to be some truth, but you hear everything. Hey, I have COVID. Hey, there's this competitive space, or hey, the market's not big enough, whatever it might be. And there could be truth in all of that too. But I think the biggest thing is, one, capital can absolutely help. And I think we want to use it strategically. But I think more than ever right now, and you can argue this could have been the case before, we know that if we can actually demonstrate we have a business, and what does that mean? You can acquire a customer for less than the cost to spend, and you can expand with the customer over time, either through increasing retention or expanding the lifetime value through product. If we can do that repeatably, we have a business. Then we control our own destiny, eventually we're not break even yet, but we'll get to break even. And at that point, we can decide, do we want to raise more capital? Great. We know exactly the funnels and levers which we're going to put cash in and amplify. Or we could decide, hey, we're cash flowing, we're growing, let's just reinvest that into the business, and the company and all the individuals at the company can have that ownership there. So, from an external perspective, you're totally right. I think what I've realized is externally, for anyone not in the business, really the only two indicators you have of how a company is doing is how much capital have they raised and how many people are at the company. But the truth is, though, those are just vanity metrics. Really, the metrics that matter are qualitatively customers who love you, and then growth, revenue, and like profitable growth at that too, not just pure top line growth. So I obviously get why people ask those two things, because they're sexier and that's what you see on the TechCrunch headlines. They're rapidly hiring, they have hundreds of people, hundreds of millions of capital raised. But the thing I think about is, do we have customers who love us and profitable growth? So not just pure top line growth, not just pure profitability. And if we can do that, then the doors will open for future fundraising rounds. Versus thinking about it the other way of, hey, if we just have the capital, that'll solve problems. I wish it was that easy, but unfortunately it's not.
Yeah, and so you referenced YC, of course, and now we're going to get into the community part of Community Capital, this podcast. When it comes to, I think, community in general, it's naturally been such a buzzword in the last few years. People have really talked about it in so many different perspectives. I think one being like YC and Techstars, definitely like the brands that people know and love from the founder community that helps like shape founders. And then naturally there's also smaller communities of founders that have, I think, like grown and gotten like more, I guess, like traction from Twitter. And then now obviously there's communities within companies. Like there's so many different ways to define it. And so for you, this, I guess, is a two-part question. How have you felt the community that was part of, I guess, like YC, or even just the community of founders that you've like been part of even after that, growing the company? How do you feel if that's kind of impacted you as a founder and the way that you're running the company, I guess, from what you've learned? And then the second part of the question is, when it comes to community from the perspective of, I guess, like internally at Doola, both with the culture, but then with your customers, like, do you have an approach to community that you think of, or do you think it's just something that kind of comes naturally, I guess?
The first thing I would say is I am a massive believer that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. It's the 5 chimps theorem. There's an actual study where in a zoo they looked at 5 chimps, and by looking at any of the 4 other chimps that one chimp spends time with, you can actually predict the behavior to a close to 100% degree of accuracy in terms of what they're like, their mood, their irritability, their traits, what they like, what they don't like, etc. And that 100% applies in life, whether you like to believe it or not. And that to me actually comes into what I believe is the power of community. Starting with YC, for example. Going into YC, yeah, maybe you know founders, but I think the biggest value of YC is the forced accountability, and not 5 chimps, but 200 chimps, or those other companies, and maybe there's 500 founders around you. But week over week, you're surrounded by these other founders, all very ambitious, all building something really cool. And that levels you up for sure. Maybe you think you're moving fast, but then you see another company that shipped twice as much of you. Holy crap, I have to reconsider my level of what it means to ship or move quickly. Maybe you think you're being creative and you see another company launch an insane marketing campaign leveraging TikTok combined with LinkedIn, whatever that might mean. Holy crap, we need to think bigger or think differently, think smarter in that sense. That just wouldn't happen unless you're surrounded by those people. So I think that surrounding yourself with those people is critical. And what I think the value of a YC is they are effectively curating that group. Yes, they have their selection process, but they've democratized that too, where you can cold apply, 10-minute interview, and they decide. Maybe there's a follow-up. But they've curated it, they've created this community of founders, and the beauty of it too is you have access to the historical founders as well. And I do think, I've thought about this a lot too, when I was in high school, I think I was a high achiever and absolutely wasn't, I wouldn't say I was even the smartest person or the hardest worker. There's some really, really talented people. But look, like you kind of felt, or if I was being completely real, you kind of feel like a big fish in a small pond. You're like, yeah, I'm doing well, these things are working. Then when I went to college, you're like, holy crap, I didn't realize there's actually people out there that are much harder workers, way smarter, IQ, or just in terms of what they know. It just completely hits you and you're like, wait a second, no, that levels me up. But some people see that and they get dejected. I see that, I'm like, whoa, like I want to be surrounded by these people and level me up too. So surround myself with those types of chimps, if you will. Now, in terms of the community though, that's the biggest thing which I actually wish I did more of, is surrounding myself with these types of people. And I think that starting a business, which is what Doola specializes in, and it doesn't even have to be starting an actual business or a VC-backed business. Starting anything is so incredibly hard. Not just hard because you're getting a business off the ground, but because there's going to be naysayers. There's going to be critics. Chances are the first thing you do are not going to work as well. You are going to get jokes, comments, digs, every single person under the sun, even your own parents. My own parents were skeptical at every single thing that we've worked on. Everyone's going to say this is why it won't work and it won't work. But despite that, you still try and you persevere and you get through it. And that's why I think the single most critical thing is you have to surround yourself with people who aren't going to lie to you, but are going to be supportive. And I think I wish I had done more of that, and I'm grateful that I did have people around me who were in similar buckets. The final thing I'll share here is when I was in San Francisco, a bunch of my closest friends were there too. All of us were just working in not big tech jobs, but in different tech jobs, etc. Fast forward to now, out of that friend group, pretty much everyone is building a company. That is not a coincidence. What happened was, if you can go back, all of us were talking about these things, and eventually 2 of us left and started companies. Next year, someone else did. The following year, 2 other people did. Now everyone is actually building a company. That is not by accident. Those are chimps that we're surrounded by, still some of my closest friends. And it doesn't mean you have to start a company too. Let's say you are trying to build a newsletter business. Surround yourself with people doing that too. Doesn't have to be your friends. You don't have to shun your friends and say, sorry, you're not my friend because you're not starting a newsletter business. But surround yourself or find yourself or put yourself in communities that can help you learn and find those chimps in whatever vertical you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. And so now I guess kind of veering into, I guess, I don't want to say like Gen Z, but I guess like this next generation, we're starting to see so many people work traditional 9-to-5 jobs, but then also have side hustles and have other ways of generating income and making multiple income streams. Like we're seeing this conversation a lot on TikTok and just in the news generally. And I'm just really curious, I think this is more like a Doola specific question, but when it comes to like that Gen Z customer, especially since now the elder cusp of Gen Z are getting into the workforce, they're maybe thinking about starting their own companies, do you see like a difference between, I guess, the Gen Z customers that are coming through and starting companies earlier and wanting to kind of like establish an LLC for that side hustle? Is there a difference that you're kind of noticing from that perspective?
I think that whether you're a younger Gen Z millennial or more seasoned entrepreneur or you're older, 1, anyone can start a business. 2, the underlying needs are similar. You want to save time, save money, save stress for this archaic process. Focus on what you do best while Doola handles the rest. There's unsexy yet critical back office work that has to be done. It's boring. In a weird way, I think it's kind of sexy to solve that problem, but for anyone else, no, you don't want to deal with it. When it comes to, let's call it Gen Z though, I do think that 1, it's easier than ever to start a business. Tools like low-code, no-code website builders, the TikTok creator marketplace where you can find influencers maybe to help you. Tools like TikTok or Twitter, you can have insane distribution and acquire customers organically by sitting behind a video camera or with your fingertips. That has meant that it's easier than ever to start a business today. Doola should obviously make it easier to start a business too. That's the goal. The biggest thing I would say though that I think is different though is that, not to generalize here, but I do think that we've noticed with more customers across the board, but especially Gen Z, the relationship or the brand does matter. And I think maybe for, let's call it in the past, this has always been the case. I do fundamentally believe, this is something which I will go to the grave with, if you will, people buy from people. They don't buy from businesses. Yes, technically there's a business and the business can have a brand, but still there's either that individual rep at the business, sales rep, or there's a person associated with the business that you were making that decision because of. And I think it's the same with Doola, where someone who wants to buy or start a company, there are actually hundreds, maybe even, actually no, there's thousands or tens of thousands of different ways to start a company. Lawyers, CPAs, other companies out there that have existed for some for decades. Why would you use Doola? It's actually a commodity offering. And you know, actually maybe you're listening like, wait, if it's a commodity, how is that even a good venture-backed business? Totally true. Commodities are really bad, but you can win on commodities. Why do you buy Grey Poupon mustard versus Heinz yellow mustard? Because it's a different type of brand. Maybe you saw the commercial. Maybe the advertiser you liked. And I think in this case with Gen Z, what I've specifically seen is that even something as small as, and we've seen this, I post content about LLCs. I post content about different things. But when I post a video about my morning routine, people feel like they can relate. And like that could be the reason why someone actually wants to form. Or they see a case study on, or a story about someone who works at Doola and they're like, whoa, I resonate with that as well there. So I think that's a bigger, again, it's not the case that other generations don't feel this way. With Gen Z specifically, I've really seen people buy from people and having that personal touch with the business. You can have your company brand, but really showing that authenticity of who you are, either as founders or as the people at the company, that can win earlier customers. And at the end of the day, the most powerful form of marketing is word of mouth. It's not TikTok, it's not Facebook, it's not Google Ads, it's just pure word of mouth. So something I'm really trying to lean into is it doesn't matter how many other companies exist in this space and how much they spend on paid marketing. If people know that Doola stands for this brand, if people decide to use Doola because they met me, if people decide to use Doola because they know people at our company, then we win. We will win going forward, and that only compounds over time. So that's what I'm hyper fixated on. I do believe that's the power of social. That's the power of that sort of authenticity. And at the end of the day, to win in a commodity offering, you can have a brand, like what's the narrative that you share, really tight operations, meaning can you just run a tight ship and solve the problem well, and then relationships. I met the person, I went to an event, whatever it might be. If you can do those three things, you can win on a commodity offering.
Yeah, and I think I definitely feel like I'm kind of a testament to everything that you're saying you've done with Doola, because I remember first seeing your Twitter and your presence and then meeting you, you do start to associate it with a specific individual and feel a lot more comfortable. And I'm a Gen Z, so I feel like it is a pretty good proof point of everything that you've done. And I have a lot of Gen Z friends who do have those side hustles or who do want to go forward and make an LLC for that consulting business they have or a design business that they have. And that fear factor of not really knowing who they associate the brand with, I think sometimes prevents them from going forward. But then as soon as I send your Twitter, people feel like they know you, they see you, they understand that this is the person kind of like driving the ship. And I think that trust, like you mentioned, definitely has a huge impact on Gen Z. So my last question here, so far everyone's had a different answer. So I'm curious, and you could definitely pause to think about it. But if you could use one word to describe your entire journey of being a founder, what would that word be? And you can also explain it.
I'll give a word. I think part of the word is part aspirational, but part I think I have done good jobs at this. But I think most good traits are double-edged swords. I'd say discipline or disciplined. Mm-hmm. The reason why I say that is when we first went through the pivot, starting post YC pivoting, and it was tough because you're going through YC and the same people in the batch, some are going off and raising these massive rounds and growing, and you're sitting there thinking, holy crap, this thing didn't work, we're starting at square zero again. And what I realized then is, okay, you actually can't truly control the outcome. There's market forces, there's other factors, but there are certain things you can control. And ultimately with any business, you are putting something into the world. And I do believe if you stay in the game long enough, take enough swings, something's going to come out of it. Maybe it's not the moonshot outcome you aspire to dream for, but cheese is, it's not as if you shoot for the stars, you land on the moon. Now in this case, when we started, I said, okay, let's leverage every single investor we have, and I'm going to hold myself accountable. So what I did when we started was every single week, I would send an investor update. Every week. It was actually a weekly update. Some investors say do it monthly, some quarterly, but every week for the first year and a half, maybe 2 years, I didn't miss a single week. An update went out every Sunday or Monday, I think is when I sent it, and didn't miss a single week. And what happened then is it naturally opened it up to feedback from investors. We were putting ourselves out there and they could comment and course correct and, again, leveraging them specifically. But it was also just this massive form of accountability because I knew I was sending that email each week and I would say, here's what we did and here's what we're doing. And obviously I didn't want to write, hey, I didn't do it. So forced accountability, put myself out there, which allowed investors to comment. And it got to a point where eventually, okay, the business, we started to grow, demonstrated there was something here. Finally, an investor said, hey, maybe you should consider switching to monthly for a more substantive update. So at that point, we switched to monthly. Still haven't missed since then. And I think that's something which I do believe is key, where at the end of the day, you're going to have moments when you're really motivated and you'll wake up and you'll want to go seize the world, do everything. You want to exercise, go meet friends, go work. There's many days, though, not the majority of days, when you don't want to do anything. And I do think at the end of the day, if you have to define discipline, it's doing the things that you hate to do like you love them. And you might not hate them all the time. There's many days when actually I love doing sales calls and maybe creating content or even talking to investors. But there's other days when you don't really want to do that. But discipline is, hey, I know this is going to lead to a good outcome, so I'm going to do it anyway. That was one example, but I'll do one final example. I now send monthly updates. And again, I try to even do like build in public updates because the way I see it is, the odds of getting struck by lightning, incredibly low, 0.0000 something percent. But if you run around with a 20-foot metal pole, the odds go up to 0.001%. Still incredibly low, but by a factor of 10,000x, you've increased them. That's why I do believe social content, building public, whatever it might be, can increase your surface area for luck. The other thing I've just realized is I've seen time and time again the returns or the power discipline can have when we were launching this new offering for DAO LLCs, decentralized autonomous organizations, now there's much less hype around them. But at the time, new offering, Wyoming had actually passed legislation that allows DAOs to get the same benefits as LLCs. I thought, okay, look, we're going to do this product hunt launch. We're doing a partnership with a big company in the space. I had recently read Atomic Habits by James Clear, and in the book, he talks about how it takes 66 days on average to build a new habit. Obviously, that doesn't mean it has to be 66 days. Sometimes it could take 2 weeks. Sometimes it could take 2 years. But on average, 66 days, if you do something consistently, you're going to build the habit. I thought, okay, we're launching this thing on DAOs. I've been somewhat consistent on Twitter, but not too consistent. For the next 66 days, I'm going to post a thread on a different DAO or a DAO-related topic, and I'm not going to miss a single day. I didn't miss a single day. I was anally obsessive about it, 66 days in a row, so just over 2 months. Sometimes I would batch post on the weekends. Sometimes it was 10 p.m. at night I hadn't posted. I got to the computer and said I'm going to post. And what happened was people started to want to associate me as the DAO person. Friends, other people would start sending me things organically. Out of all those 66 posts, some did not go viral, but some did start to go viral and get pickup traction. The third thing, though, is that organically, if you Google search DAO LLC, we're the #1 organic search on Google. Other companies in the space realized, whoa, this is the DAO LLC company. We want to partner with them. And the numbers didn't lie. Historically, over 30% of all DAO LLCs ever created have been formed with Doola. When I saw that 66-day stretch, I realized, holy crap, you can put anything into the world with some discipline and consistency. And once I saw that, I realized in some way, I feel like I have the superpower of this experience where, yeah, I know if I just pick something and you put your mind to it and you're disciplined, maybe you won't become the #1 search or 30% of DAOs will be created, but something good is going to happen. So my biggest thing is, hey, going forward, stay disciplined, but I did say double-edged sword, so I will say something I need to do a much better job of is before just getting disciplined, day, go crank, think a bit more strategically at first and pick my head up a bit more to evaluate, should I go down this path? I think sometimes I've taken that 66-day mentality and done 132 days or too long, and I should have done 33 days instead. So discipline to me is incredibly key. All aspects of life at the end of the day, I think discipline gives you more freedom because if you are disciplined in certain things, it gives you the time and flexibility to do other things as well. So here's to more discipline going forward, and I think I've seen the signs of it, and it's always great to just be surrounded by people that can push me in that way too.
That's awesome. Shockingly, no one has said discipline yet, so it's great that we continue to get new words from incredible founders like yourself. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. I know there was a wealth of information that was shared from you. And yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks so much. It was a ton of fun.